Okay, my name is Alyssa Ralston. I'm here with Keith and Jenny Evers. It is June 14th, 2024. We are at the Linfield campus in Portland in the library. And Jenny and Keith, thank you so much for being with me today.
Our pleasure.
Can you tell us a little bit about your Linfield experience?
Yeah, let me start because I'm a townie, so I grew up in McMinnville, and my family used to do our family portraits in the Oak Grove.
Okay.
Even though neither of my parents went to Linfield, some of my my relatives did. It was just a nice place for family photos and so. So I grew up, sort of in Linfield, right? And it just seemed like a natural place for me to go. And that's the start of it, I guess. That's how I started there. Sure.
My story, I grew up in a really small town in Northern California, so I knew I didn't want to go to a big school. I really wanted to go to the East Coast, but that didn't work out. When I drove, my dad and stepmom lived in Portland, and they drove through Linfield, and because they knew people who had gone to Linfield, and it looked like a college that would be on the East Coast. And as I started kind of narrowing it down, I started to ask questions, and I was impressed. I really wanted to travel. I wanted to study a foreign language. I wanted to study Japanese. And when I would talk to another small private school nearby, they kind of didn't really seem to have a program. But then when I talked to the Linfield students, they were telling me about Jan term and how you could travel, for a semester, and that was really interesting to me. And then I think really what sealed it was I had a professor call me, and it was clear he was looking at my application, invited me to come to campus, that you are a student that we're interested in. And as I've shared with my kids and with Keith, you spend so much of time preparing for college, you hope they like you, that they'll accept you. And here was a college who thought I would be a good fit, and they wanted me. And so I think that's what sealed it for me.
So tell us about coming to campus and being a student on campus in those first couple of years.
I think I had a pretty typical college experience, living in the dorms, eating in Dillon Hall. Some of my best friends today are the ones I met when I first came to campus. Before Linfield purchased Hewlett-Packard, there were some trailers by the baseball field, and I lived in those single-wide trailers, I think my sophomore year, which was an interesting experience. I just really enjoyed my time there. And the other thing why I wanted to go to Linfield was because your professors had actually been out in the field. So you were being taught by people who knew what it was like in the real world. And no offense to graduate students or anything like that, but I wanted to be taught by the people who knew. And the smaller classrooms I really liked, smaller class size. As I got into my major, having 10 people in my class, you really got to know your professors, and not just as professors, but as people. One of my professors, I was so intimidated by her, and then once I had her class, I just realized she was just amazing. That's why I was probably intimidated.
Who was that?
Sandy Keel. It was a wonderful experience. And having been in Northern California and going to McMinnville, it was similar weather and not a huge change for me.
No, you keep going. When I was in high school, at McMinnville High School, I really started to feel like I was going to be an English major, and so that was my, that's really what I identified with was English lit and creative writing and all of that stuff in high school. And so when I started looking at colleges, it turns out like there was an amazing program right there in my hometown. I worked with Barbara Drake and Ken Erickson and a number of other names, and it just felt like a really good fit for me to go there. So my first couple of years, though, I didn't live on campus. There was an exception made because my family home was a few miles away, and it offered me a chance to save some money those first years. And so I loved my time on campus. I would go to campus and attend classes and meet with my friends and my professors, and then I would always go to a part-time job, and then I would go back to the family farm. So I didn't really have that ingrained experience my first couple of years, but the difference was the summer between my first and second year at Linfield, I worked that summer for the physical plant, and that was an eye-opener, because I went into all of those dorm buildings and did like the dirty, like I smashed toilets to pieces, right? Like ancient toilets, they had to be, and it was just easier if you're going to remove this ancient toilet that was set up in 1925, just sledgehammer it rather than try to take it off nicely. Sledgehammer it and sweep it up. So it was there was a lot of destruction, smashing tiles and things. So we were given the dirty jobs at the physical plant. It was me and several other students, and a really busy summer, and a real opportunity to really see the campus in a way I hadn't experienced my first year. And then after that, you know, I spent a lot more time on campus after that, and eventually, you know, renting apartments nearby and those kinds of things. So yeah, so I guess we'd say my first year, I felt like kind of a daytime visitor, but it just grew and grew, and the more time I spent on campus, the more familiar I got with all of campus, the various departments, the more at home I felt. And by the time I graduated, you know, it was like my home. You know, I have a picture on my phone. I can share these with you later. I have a picture on my phone of me at 8 years old, you know, in the Oak Grove.
Mm.
And then another picture of me at 18 in the Oak Grove just before going to Linfield. And then I've got a picture, you know, with this gal rolling around on the Oak Grove because we were, you know, had just met, and we were young. We were rolling around in the grass. But anyway, so that's, you know, sort of my journey was like feeling like, you know, Linfield was my backyard, but not really connecting with it until I'd been there for a couple of years, and then really, you know, feeling like it was home.
So we talked about the first couple of years of your experience, and then how did you choose a major? And talk to me about choosing a major, the classes in your major, and then kind of post-graduation. What did your major do for you?
I chose an English major at the time. I really liked literature. I really liked writing. I really liked writing papers, like, you know, the stuff that my kids now tell me they just hate to do, but I really love that. So I took classes on all different periods of time. At one point I did a Jan term trip to England to study Jane Austen. And what that meant, and this was Ken Erickson's class, and what that meant was reading a Jane Austen novel like every week, right? So we were cramming Jane Austen, and then, you know, traveling around to the sites where it was set, going to Bath, going to all of these places, and yeah, it was just super interesting to do that. I'll always remember there's a day when Ken Erickson, we were all sleepy. It was late summer, and he's not a very dramatic guy. He is very dramatic, and you know, he was a really generally an engaging instructor. But it was summertime, and we were all just half asleep, you know. And he said, you know, I'm going to do something, and he put his chair up on the desk in the classroom. And he sat up on top of the desk on the chair, and the casters of the wheels were like hanging off the edge here, and we were terrified that he was going to break his neck for a whole hour. And I mentioned that to someone in another class, and years later, 20, 30 years later, I mentioned, like, do you remember that day when Ken Erickson like put his chair up on the desk? And they said, oh, he did that every year. That was a stunt he pulled every year. He knew exactly how to get a chair up on that desk without killing himself, but it was terrifying. So I went to Linfield. I studied English. I graduated with an English major, and you know, Jenny and I will talk a little bit. But for my first year after graduation, I sort of was a little. I didn't have a real career path. I worked at Barnes & Noble. That felt like I was doing something with English. I worked at Barnes & Noble for a bit. I traveled out, you know, to Michigan and lived with a friend at the University of Michigan. But soon, Jenny got a job, and we'll talk more about this, I suppose, but she got a job teaching English through Linfield, got a job teaching English in Japan. And she said, why don't you come with me? Like, we're dating, like, what are you doing? I'm like, yeah, why don't I? That's great. So I got a job teaching English in Japan, and we did that for 2 years. And then I came back, and I got a job writing educational content for a software company through Renaissance Learning. So I was writing educational test items for K through 12, writing reading passages, writing grammar assessment questions, those kinds of things. And so that's sort of how my English major very gradually, translated into really doing English majory stuff. And yeah, so I guess that was my path.
So I went to Linfield as a communications major. Took one class and decided that wasn't for me. No offense to anybody in the class or the professor, I just realized it wasn't my path. So I went and decided I wanted to be in business. I wanted to study Japanese. This was a time when Japan's economy was booming. They were buying things everywhere. There was a lot of talk about it was so hard to do business in Japan because no one could understand Japanese. And I thought, well, I'm going to study Japanese so I can get a job. And so I ended up studying international business and minored in Japanese. And I guess part of my goal was hopefully someone would give me a job so I could go travel, which I guess eventually has happened. So part of the minor was that I had to study in Japan for a semester. So I went to our sister school in Yokohama. And while I studied Japanese because I thought it would help me get a job. Staying in Japan for that semester, I just fell in love with the country, with the culture, and before I came back, I knew I was going to move to Japan. I didn't know what I was going to do, how I was going to do that. I was looking at newspapers, because that's what we did then. Looked at newspapers to see what jobs I could get, and it was pretty obvious that I was going to have to teach English. So I came back and started talking to my professor, like, this is what I want to do. And so it was just luck that there was a Linfield student in Japan teaching English. He had decided to come back to the United States. He needed to find a replacement. He had contacted my Japanese professor. It turns out his dad was on the board of directors, I think, at Linfield. So his dad came and interviewed me to see if I would be a good fit. And then I found out right before I graduated my senior year that they had accepted me and offered me a job. It was a time where I didn't have pictures. I just got a letter that said, just show up in July. And, I didn't even know the person I was replacing. And so, yeah, Keith and I had been dating for about a year. And so he ended up getting a job with an English language school, and I was teaching for a board of education. And he timed his so that he could be in a city near me. At Linfield, I had a great experience, just with my business classes. And then moving to Japan really helped my language skills. But after 2 years of teaching English, we kind of decided we should probably move back to the States and grow up and get real jobs. So moved back, worked for a rental car company because they were talking about expanding internationally. That didn't pan out. And so again, looking at the newspaper, I found a Japanese company that was looking for someone for kind of an entry-level position. And I interviewed with them, and I don't recommend that people do this, but I kind of fessed up that I didn't really understand what they did because we didn't have Google. I was just like, I think I kind of understand. They said, that's okay. You understand Japanese, and so we'll teach you everything you know. And they essentially introduced me to my career. I worked in freight forwarding, and then I ended up, my customer was Pendleton Woolen Mills, and they ended up needing to hire someone, so I transitioned to that company, to Pendleton. I'm still there. I've been there over 22 years. And I just moved through the company. And, so when people ask me, what did you study and are you doing anything with it? I'm exactly doing it. The funny thing is when I studied it at Linfield, I never knew this career existed. I didn't study it going, I want to be in sourcing and supply chain. But that's what I've ended up doing.
We were talking before we started recording about you being a love at Linfield situation. Can you tell us a little bit about how you met?
So let's see. First, I think it was my sophomore year, freshman year. We were in what's this, Levi?
Carlisle.
Levi?
I think it was Levi Carlisle.
Levi Carlisle's economics class. And I was sitting here and in that economics class, and I was frankly a little bored with it, but I value it now. But at the time, and I had a friend who had gone to high school with me who was sitting here, and then Jenny sat just right next to me. And I think I spent most of that class jabbering with the person that I knew, but I kind of noticed her, and I think one time I noticed she's wearing some like Chuck Connors. I mentioned that I liked those shoes on her. I don't know why that I guess that was my those were my first words to her, frankly, was that I liked her Chuck Connors shoes, and I don't know that there was like magic chemistry. She was probably like, all right, thanks, but then just so happens we remembered each other's names and faces enough to, little wave over the next year or two. I mean, when she was in Japan, I didn't know her well enough to even know she was gone. So, but when she came back, we just sort of started talking on campus, and it took off from there. Now, we really started dating just before I graduated. And so prior to us dating, I had already arranged to go out to Michigan to live with a friend who was finishing up a final year at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor. So we dated, and we dated that summer, and it was terrific. We really had a match, but I also had all of these arrangements to go live in Michigan, and so I did that. I went out and lived in Michigan, and I made it about 6 months. And my first reason for coming back, I missed her. But my second reason was that I'm an Oregon kid, not used to a Michigan winter, and it really threw me a little bit. And also, I was just spinning my wheels. I was working for Barnes & Noble, and like I'd grown up on a farm, right? So I knew all kinds of dirty work. But I'm surprised there's no dirtier job than book sales. There's a dust throughout everything, and honestly, I would like carry books around a Barnes & Noble and just feel intrinsically filthier than I had ever felt before. And then, so anyway, when I came back to McMinnville, Jenny was finishing up her senior year of college. And so I resumed working, I think, in the coffee shop in McMinnville that I'd worked in off and on over the years. And really, it was when she said, hey, I just got this job in Japan, that it struck me, well, that's a great thing to do. I've already practiced getting out of McMinnville once. And so, I got a job. I went with an English chain school. She worked with a school district, and a board of education. So she had a very good job there, and then I took the McDonald's English teacher version of that. No, it was a fine company. It was a fine company called. It was a lot of fun, actually. And so I came out there shortly after she went out there, and we managed to kind of have parallel jobs and we were 30 minutes to an hour, depending on commute time, away from each other. So we get to spend tons of time together and travel around, not just Japan, but travel around that part of the world. We went to Australia. Together we traveled around Japan together, and it was a great fun. Just being young and having jobs, but not jobs with significant responsibilities. And we just had a great time.
Can you tell me about your impressions of Japan being there as foreigners?
So we lived just north of Tokyo, and there weren't necessarily a lot of foreigners, even though they were pretty large cities where we lived. So you really stood out. I think because I spoke Japanese, it's so interesting when people would see me, they would instantly tell me they couldn't speak to me. They didn't understand English. And I would say in Japanese, I understand, I speak a little Japanese, and they'd just say over and over, I can't speak English. And it would take like 3 times, and then they would stop, and they'd say, are you speaking Japanese? And I'm like, yes, I am. But you know, once they kind of got over that fear of communicating with you, like I had so many instances where people who owned shops, every time I came in then, they were just like, oh, Jenny's on, you know, and they were just so happy to see me. And I mean, overall, I think we had a really good experience. I taught middle school, and I loved when I would be invited to the primary school. They were so fun, and you know, trying to explain to kindergartners why my eyes are blue and why my hair was yellow and, at the time was kind of funny. In middle school, you know, they were kind of, and I think it's probably typical now that we've had kids that go through middle school. They're like really young and happy, and then they start going through puberty, and they become kind of sullen. And even in Japanese middle school, it was kind of that way. But also a really great experience because I ate lunch with the kids, we ate in the classroom, and just kind of seeing that experience. Pros and cons, just like pros and cons here. We did travel a lot. I do have kind of a sidebar story. So I had studied at Kanto Gakuin University in Yokohama, and there was some anniversary, and President Vivian Bull had come to Japan. And so I went down to the university for the anniversary celebration, whatever. And so I reconnected with the office staff. And I told them, oh yeah, I'm living in Japan, and they're like, great, and I gave them my contact information. And then at some point they contacted me and said, hey, would you be interested in doing a television show? And I said, well, technically my contract says I can't do any other job. But then my supervisor was like, that's a great idea. and it wasn't like NHK, like primetime television, but what happened was there was a professor of English at the university who was going to have this show about teaching people how to take the exam for English language proficiency, and they needed a native English speaker. So they were like, hey, we know someone in Japan. So it was wild. They would have me travel to Tokyo, like I think for 2 or 3 weekends. I went down and I would spend all day in a studio with these young Japanese women who were delightful. And I would just say sentences in English because I was just essentially their native speaker. And then we would go out at night, and I went to the best restaurants, and I stayed at they put me up in a pretty nice hotel. And then the wild part, and this is just kind of in Japan, they'd take me to the train station, they'd hand me an envelope of cash. And they'd say, thank you so much for coming. And I'd be like, this is so weird. But it was a lot of fun. It was just kind of one of those weird experiences that I wouldn't have had if I hadn't studied at that university through Linfield.
That's the thing. That's how it is in Japan. Like, this was certainly true in the 80s and 90s when we were there, and probably is to a degree today, which is there's a strong interest in learning English. It is the, you know, lingua franca of like business and transactions. And so I always felt like, first of all, you're sort of other, you know, in Japan. While many people go to Japan, there's actually not a great deal of foreigners outside of the Tokyo area. So, you know, you do kind of stick out a little bit, but everyone, in my experience, there was very polite, and people wanting to speak English with you. It's a chance to practice, you know, speaking English with a native speaker. That was something that they found very valuable. So, yeah, and I worked with a lot of adult learners there as well. So I had a few high school students and a lot of college students and a lot of adult learners. Even my oldest student was 80.
What was your 80-year-old student trying to get out of the course?
I think his purpose in going to the school was to just keep some kind of cognitive challenge going. Mm-hmm. You know, learning was an exercise for him. So
similar to senior citizens going back to community college.
Sure.
Yeah. We're going to backtrack a little bit and go back to campus.
Okay.
Can you tell us a little bit about a typical weeknight on campus in the mid-90s or a typical weekend?
We both worked, and so...
What were you doing?
Let's see, I think it was my freshman and sophomore year, I worked at Dairy Queen. I also had work study at the library.
It's the same one that's still there in McMinnville?
Oh,
Okay, all right.
Yes.
I'll think of you when I drive by.
Yes. I always worked the drive up, the blizzards. And
That's the
then
thing.
like when I came back from Japan, I worked for New to You, the consignment store that's on that corner. I worked there. So I didn't always spend a lot of time on campus. I'd say if I had any regret, that was one. But I mean, on the weekends, again, I worked most of the time, but we would, go to parties and things in the evening. I mean, actually, how Keith and I kind of started dating was, we were actually just telling our kids this story. I actually called into work to see if they needed me, and they didn't. And I was like, yay, I can stay on campus and study. And it was so rare. And I was walking through Fred Meyer Hall, and I heard someone say, I still don't know your last name. And my maiden name is Smith, so not a big reach. And I was like, and Fred Meyer Hall, it echoes when you talk, and I was just like really self-conscious. And I turn around, and it's Keith. And so I walked over because I didn't want to talk and have an echo. And that's how we kind of started talking. But I think
you were on your way to an event, right? Like you were doing.
You asked me.
Oh, I asked you out,
and
you said no. But I'm going to this Linfield event tonight.
Yes.
To hear some speaker in the gym.
Yes.
And I said, okay, if I really want to go out with you, I'm going to follow you. Story of our life. Right? I'll just follow Jenny wherever she's going.
So, yeah, I don't know. So I don't have like a lot of memories of being on campus in the evening or in the afternoon. I mean, if it was the afternoon, it was between class. It was very rare that I ever skipped class on a beautiful spring day to sit outside. A couple times I did, and it's kind of what you expect from a college experience.
Yeah, I worked at a lot of different jobs in McMinnville, but a lot of them, like Union Block Coffee. You guys know Union Block Coffee because it's still there, right? So I worked at Union Block Coffee for years, served up a lot of coffee. And at the time, Union Block was also owned by the people who owned a business called Video Yogurt Express. That was a combination of yogurt access and videotapes. So I was a very popular guy to know if you wanted a deal on coffee or videos or yogurt. I was your man, and that was really handy. I worked there all the time. Between one of those three businesses, actually, because the owners had me on payroll, they just wouldn't. I was very busy between those businesses, and and then I would see my friends from Linfield, or maybe my new girlfriend would come in with her friends and study in Union Block and get the Keith Evers deal. So yeah.
But I don't think you didn't spend as much time on campus in the evening as you did.
I did do some events on campus. Occasionally if there was a speaker or presentation, I would occasionally go. But it's true that most of my weekday evenings, I was off campus, or I wasn't living on campus, and so so I wasn't there all the time. On the weekends, there were always parties and things
On
nearby.
campus or off campus?
Both.
They're not supposed to be on, but
I'm gonna shock you guys. There were parties with alcohol on campus. I know. I didn't think that happened, but in fact it did. I saw it with my own eyes. But yeah. So that's what we did.
So I looked you both up in the yearbooks before we came here, and so I noticed that Keith, you were involved in a literary magazine during your time.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. It was called Test Marketed Downpour.
Yeah.
And it was kind of part of the creative writing program. So being part of that and putting that together, which was a lot of fun. I did that for a couple of years, and then recently, so the Terroir Creative Writing Festival in Yam Hill, it is actually one of the people who run that is Barbara Drake, who was my creative writing teacher at the time. So I participated again in that, which is it's a creative writing conference in Yam Hill, but it was a way for me to go back and connect with Linfield, and I've done a handful of things with. I think the literary magazine has changed names But last year they published a piece. They opened up to people who had graduated from Linfield, and so I submitted a piece and they published it. And I got to spend some time with the creative writing students and the professor, and Joe Wilkins, got to spend some time with them, and it was just a lot of fun to reconnect with that group. Yeah, it was a lot of fun.
The name of the literary magazine has changed many times over the decades.
Yeah.
And my favorite was in the early 70s when it was called Grope.
Yeah.
We are working on digitizing those right now, so had we digitized your year, I would have found that as well.
Yeah.
And then Jenny, I saw that you were in Spurs.
Yes, I think that was an organization my sophomore year.
Mm-hmm.
I was really involved in high school in different community events, community service, and Spurs was one of those organizations.
So Jenny, you referred to having been at Pendleton for 22 years now. Can you talk a little bit about your trajectory?
Sure. So Pendleton was my customer, and I actually met with the manager, and he said, "Oh, the person you've been working with is being promoted within the organization, so I'm going to have a position open." He didn't ask me to apply, but I've been thinking about going to that side of the business. So I talked to Keith, and Keith's always been really good with my career because I don't think it's unusual that you have some self-doubt and whether you should put yourself out there. And Keith was like, "Well, what do you have to lose?" And I kept coming up with all of these things. And he was like, "Those things aren't going to happen," or "It's not going to be the big deal that you think it's going to be." So I just sent him my cover letter and resume. The job hadn't even been posted, I don't think. And so he brought me in, and I started my career at Pendleton. I handled their exports. And then I'm a curious person, so I always want to know more. And at some point I asked him, "Can I learn the import side too?" And so they were training me, and I do have a bad habit when I don't like something, I want to try to change it. And I just didn't like how they were managing it. And so I brought in all these cross-functional folks and said, "Hey, what if we do this?" And listen to everybody, and then created this. It's really a spreadsheet. But it actually put everything kind of as a dashboard. And I guess what that did was they felt that I had some kind of leadership potential and that I could do more. So then they created a position for me as the assistant manager of the department. So I then became a manager, and then, managing is so interesting. It's wonderful and really hard. I love it when my people succeed. That's the best part, but it's also the hardest job because, then you also deal with not the great side of managing people. My manager left and went to another company, so they offered me the management position. And I stayed in that position for about 10 years. And at that time, I also got my customs broker license. Did that for quite a while, and actually, I've had some really good managers and mentors in my career. And I sat down with her and I said, "What's next for me? It's not really clear at Pendleton. Pendleton's not a huge company, where I can go next." And she kind of asked me why I would leave, and I said, "If I'm bored." And while I had challenges in my job, when I first started the job, the challenges I would have would feel really overwhelming. It's such a big challenge, but those things would happen later, and I'd be like, "Okay, here we go again." And so it became kind of routine. And she was really good because she pushed it back on me, and she said, "What value do you think you can bring to the company? What do you think you want to do that you would bring value?" So I thought about it, and I thought about the people I worked with, and I said, "I think I want to move to sourcing." So I'd always, imports and exports and trade compliance and logistics. And so I always worked with the sourcing folks, but I said, I understand this piece of the supply chain. I want to add more. And it so happened that someone was retiring that had a different job, so they created a whole different position, kind of a weird mishmash of responsibilities, and brought me into that role. And and as you go through your career, you become confident, and you become a little more assertive. At that time, I love my team, my logistics team. They've been with me for at least, I think the last person I hired was 11 years ago. And the one who's been with me the longest is 16. And I really, really liked this group. And when they offered me the job to move to sourcing, they said, "Oh, but logistics is going to go over here." And I'm like, "Well, why isn't logistics coming with me?" And they go, well, you know, you don't really want to keep managing that. And I said, well, yes, I do. And so they asked me if I was going to decline the job. And I said, well, I don't understand why you wouldn't bring logistics into sourcing. So interview or discussion cut short, and we'll regroup the next day. And so I just went in and said, look, this is a fine-tuned machine that I've created, and they are part of the supply chain. We don't want to separate it. So I said, you know, it's not a deal breaker for the new promotion, but I just don't understand why you would want to do that. So they trusted me and let me bring logistics into the sourcing group. And then the VP at the time had hinted that he wanted to retire. And I was in sourcing for about 3 years. He's kind of hinting around, and he was training me on some things. So I kind of sensed that he would like me to replace him. And again, it was probably a year and a half ago, in my review, I said, so what's my plan? Like, what's the plan for me? What does the company want to do? And he said, well, Jenny, I think that's really up to you to decide. You've got to know what you want. So then I'm like, oh, now it's on me again. And
it's a good place to be, though.
But it was good, and it really forced me to think about what I wanted to do. Like, did I really want to go from managing 7 people to 30 people? I knew that there were challenges with that role. I mean, a VP role is just very different. You know, how was that going to impact my family? And so thought about it for about 6 months. And at some point, a couple of years ago, I guess, I don't really remember the timeline, it seems all mushed together, he brought up his retirement again. And I said, I like to be transparent, so just so you know, I'm going to throw my hat in the ring when you post the job or when the job becomes available. And so he was super excited, and then he talked to his manager, and she had managed me before, so she was really excited. And then, so it's been almost a year that I've been in this role. I travel, coming back to wanting a job that I would travel. Work travel's not as fun as I thought it would be. But there are fun aspects, meeting people, seeing production. It's a great way to learn. So, no, I'm still in that learning phase. But I have a great team. It was part of the reason I agreed to apply for the job, is that, you know, I love working with people who are smarter than me. You know, I'm always amazed. I mean, I know how to sew, but no one wants me to sew clothing. And it's just so interesting to watch how a garment comes together and everything that leads up to getting that garment made. So.
Yeah, and she gets to see a lot of garment production in you know, the 2 main places for garment production, South America and Asia. So yeah, she's traveling to Hong Kong and various cities in South America. It's really cool.
No, and it just is an appreciation for the people who do that work too. You know, Pendleton is known for their plaids, and we match everything. And that's a lot of work. Mm-hmm. And you know, watching people match plaids, I'm just like, wow, that is not me.
So Keith, you left off your professional trajectory. We were talking about Renaissance Learning.
Yeah,
What happened
okay.
after that?
Yeah, so I started with Renaissance Learning in around 1999, and as soon as I had a paycheck, I proposed. Like, been a few years of dating, and I just needed a solid paycheck, and then I was like, okay, I'm gonna propose. So we did. I proposed in the Rose Garden. Maybe there's a section on romance later on in your class. But anyway, there you go.
Your most memorable date.
Yeah, exactly. And so I worked for Renaissance Learning for 10 years, doing a variety of things. I started out as an educational content editor, writing those test items and so on, and moved into project management and a little bit of software component management. So I did that from 1999 to 2009. 2009, the economy, tanked, and a huge portion of our company was laid off, including me. And so I said, all right, so what's next? I reached out to Linfield. I don't know if you know Debbie. knows everybody. She's amazing. She is like a walking encyclopedia of the Linfield universe and so much more.
I joke that when she decides to go, we're gonna have to like Matrix style, like get
I
the shit
know,
out of her head.
I know. But anyway, I reached out. I don't know what. Did I reach out to Debbie? Did I reach out to someone at Linfield? But anyway, I'd just been laid off. The recession was terrible. Jobs were like impossible to find. But I reached out to Linfield, and I got a hold of Debbie. And again, I'm a townie, so I know like Debbie and her sister and her family, and her dad. There's so much Linfield history there, but a lot of McMinnville history, right? So she said, well, my sister is hiring for her company, and her sister, Amy, was a manager for Kaplan test prep. So I'd done a great deal of test prep in Japan, prepping for the TOEIC and the TOEFL and so on. I'd done a lot of educational content and project management. What they needed was an academic manager for the Portland branch of Kaplan test prep, and that was for SAT, ACT, MCAT, and even USMLE. So I took that job, and this was at a point where we had a 2.5-year-old son, and we were expecting our daughter within weeks, really, when I lost my job, or months, or anyway. But I took the job managing the downtown Portland Kaplan Center, and I worked there for a couple of years. There's some transitions in the company, and soon I found myself working at the national level for Kaplan, and which was working from home, which was amazing because it meant that it just gave a lot of flexibility in terms of where our kids were and what was going on with us. But I would occasionally have to travel around the country and a lot of the Pacific Northwest. So Kaplan moved me into a position as an academic manager for the nursing prep program. So the NCLEX, right? So I worked with Linfield's nursing program. I worked with every nursing program west of the Rockies at least once. And at that time, it was the north of campus. So I know I worked with nursing students in an academic role for 6 or 7 years, and then there were another number of other transitions where I kept moving up in the organization nationally until I became the national facilities manager. And what that meant was working with colleges and setting up venues for our classes, and then setting up venues for events and so on. And I was working a lot more with our school with medical students and medical programs, with law schools, nursing schools. So I did that. And after 12 years of that, I just kind of really felt like I needed a change. And I applied for a position with OHSU. OHSU had a new department, and it was the Office of Learner Placement and Housing. This was 3 years ago. And what OHSU wanted to do was, OHSU has a variety of different schools within it, of course. There's the School of Medicine, but related to that, there are the School of Dentistry, there's the School of Nursing, dietetics, radiation therapy, and so on. So these are each kind of unique entities. And every student in these programs needs to spend a certain amount of time on a rural medical rotation. And so each of these programs had always kind of managed sending their students out to Eugene or way out to Baker City or Burns or somewhere. And they each had their own little kind of corner, and they each, maybe rented an apartment or something. And so we pulled all of those together, and I became the manager for OHSU's student housing program. And that's a role I have now. So managing leases, operations, managing all of the aspects of housing for OHSU all around the state, and then coordinating when students go up to Alaska or if they travel elsewhere. So I manage that program, and then another side of our program is educational placement software. So I was part of the team that selected a vendor for student education placement software so that we can track rotations and place rotations, and kind of integrating all of those programs to one place. So it's really been about pulling all the corners of OHSU into a centralized hub. Housing was the first phase, and now we're moving into the second phase, which is managed rotational placement. So I manage a lot of data for that. I report on where every student goes every year across the organization and find out where they have commonalities, and then work with our teams on affiliation agreements and contracts, and then of course the housing component. So I still occasionally will need to load up my car and drive around the state and visit these various apartments and make sure that the students are doing the right job of keeping them in shape and upgrading whatever needs to be upgraded. So that is the job I do today.
You've stayed pretty close to Linfield since you graduated, and what is it about Linfield that makes you keep wanting to be involved?
So I think for me, I think Keith and I have done well with our education and want to give back to Linfield. I was speaking in Professor Nelson's class for about 15 years. At the time I was looking for, I had an open position. It was around the time of graduation 15 years ago. And she happened to be the department head. And I reached out to her and she goes, well, would you like to come speak to my class? And I was like, oh, okay. I guess so. and then she kept inviting me back. And I just really enjoyed connecting with the students. It reminds you of your own time. But then it also reminded me of, how I could give back and share my experience with them, but also talk to them about what we look for in people. That's one of the things that Professor Nelson would have me talk about, what I look for when I'm hiring someone.
What do you look for when you're hiring someone?
Really, I look for the qualities of a Linfield grad.
Just look for the Mac the Wildcat on the thing. Done.
I mean, really,
purple blood.
Attitude, aptitude. I mean, for the most part, what I do, you can take classes, but you're never really going to understand how to do it unless you actually do it. And so I really want someone who can get in there and learn and is open to learning and open to facing challenges and maybe not succeeding sometimes. And I just find that from our education, it's about being curious and asking questions. I often will contact the business department if I know Pendleton has an open position that I think would be good. Even within Pendleton, I think that those of us who are from Linfield, we're respected. I often hear, oh yeah, Linfield, it's a great school, and of course they know all of us who went to Linfield. So we're doing well for Linfield. But yeah, it's mainly giving back because I feel like I got so much, and where I am in my career, part of that was that start at Linfield.
So for the last 15 years with Kaplan and then with OHSU, I have been working intensely with colleges and universities around the country, visiting them, speaking to student groups and working with administrators and so on. And so what I've come to understand is that Linfield is uncommonly good in terms of its culture. What I mean by that is it's not too small, it's not too large. OHSU is wonderful, but it's also vast, and it's spread out and all of this. But Linfield is a very kind of focused community, and I say this as someone who goes to campus now. I was like, wow, it's gotten so much bigger. That's where the football field used to be. There used to be some tractors parked out there, and now there's a building. But it is still a remarkable culture because it is. First of all, it's in a community near and dear to my heart. McMinnville is an exceptionally community. I mean, it shows up in America's Best Small Towns lists all the time for a reason, because structurally, how it sits geographically, how they planned 3rd Street off of 99, all of these elements make it a wonderful little town. And Linfield is a core part of that. Linfield's been there, for the very beginning of McMinnville's history, and so it's very much a part of it. So I see kind of the two of them the culture of Linfield has always been very close, and I felt like there were people and programs I had nothing really to do with while I was at Linfield, but I didn't feel like I was estranged from them. We were all Wildcats. We were all part of Linfield, and so having seen so many other schools, I realized it is exceptional. It is an exceptional place, so I really value that.
You already answered my question about what changes have you observed on campus since you graduated. What changes do you hope to see in the next 30 years?
Oh gosh, I mean, I'm part of the Business Advisory Council, so obviously enrollment, I always think about that, like making sure that, there are programs that are attractive to students, and that they're preparing students for their career when they leave Linfield. I mean, the campus has changed so much. Like when I go to speak in the business department, I'm like, I remember this part of the building because this is where I repaired books, because that's the library. I hadn't even walked into the new library. So it's just changed so much that I don't know that I have any expectations of what should be next.
Yeah, I don't know if I can add much more to what Jenny said. I mean, I think with the focus of Linfield has shifted as it needs to take on what is changing about the area. Like, for example, the wine business and everything that Linfield has done to foster wine development, which is amazing. And that was just very, very beginning stages 30 years ago when we were there. So to see that is exciting. I think, what I want to see of Linfield is to continue to do that without losing track of those liberal arts elements that attracted students like me who they enjoyed reading books and writing and yet here I am in the business world. I do business all day long, but that was sort of my home. That's what drew me there was those kind of programs. So I know that if Linfield can keep doing both of those worlds, the practical and a little bit of room for the dreamers and the folks like I was.
Those are all the questions that I had for you. Is there anything that I forgot to ask or anything that you'd like to share with our audience today?
I don't think so. I mean, we had a great time. And, I know that the cost of university is top of mind for a lot of people. And we both graduated with student loans. But, and everyone has an opinion about that, but I've always looked at it as an investment in myself, and really the return was what I did with it. So for me, being at Linfield, while I graduated with debt, and at the time it felt so huge, it really has paid off for me. And then just being connected, coming back with Professor Nelson's class, I mean, that was just kind of a fluke. I was not aiming to be on campus all the time. And then that led to joining the Business Advisory Council, where I've met some really dynamic, amazing people. And of course, so many of us are from Linfield, and we care so much about Linfield. And it's fun to connect with those people. I mean, I didn't necessarily go to school with them. We all graduated at different times. But just knowing we have that passion for the school. And I think when you're a student, you don't realize how many alumni are out there, and that we're happy to bring you along. I think that's the other thing that I think about at my time at Linfield. Like, I was just clueless that there was this group of people who I could have reached out to. That probably could have helped me. I'm pretty happy with my trajectory in my career and what happened, but it could have been different. One thing that I was invited to do, and I don't know if Linfield does it anymore, but they did a Life After Linfield dinner, and it was a dinner towards the end of spring. And it was interesting because it was kind of this formal dinner, and seniors came. And it was to teach them how to conduct themselves.
Was that last year or the year before?
Oh no, it was years ago.
Oh, okay.
That was the symposium.
Oh, that's right.
Although another event where you have multiple forks.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah,
you know, I mean, it can be intimidating.
yeah.
And what I love though at the symposium, when the one student wasn't sure, like what utensil to use, they didn't have a problem asking.
Yeah.
You know, can you help me? Like it was a safe space for them. Like, and that's the way it should be. But I was invited to the Life After Linfield dinner to speak, and it's kind of like this: like you graduate from Linfield, and then what happened? And it's just, it was so fun to listen to everyone's story, and so many times, and I even took away this message, which was, we're so focused when you're in college, like, what am I gonna do afterwards, and like, what's my path? But sometimes you have to be open to what is presented to you, because maybe you're gonna go this way, and it's gonna be just as great, if not better, and kind of just be open to the chance and opportunity. And because I'm very type A, I'm gonna graduate, gotta get a job. It was nice to hear other alumni talk about that, and I think I started to think that way. Is like I should be a little bit more open and consider different paths. So, although my path is still pretty straight.
Yeah. I mean, I think haven't been honest about why we went to Linfield, which is to find a life mate. And that's really what that's why we went there. I owe all my health, wealth, and happiness to the person I met, weeks before graduating. No, but I'm kind of joking. Worked out well.
All right, well, that's all we have for you today. Thank you so much for being with us
All right.
today.
Yeah,
We'll let you off the
Thank
hook.
you.
Okay.
All right.